After years of debate, Japan has started releasing treated wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear plant. It's drawing strong protests from locals in other countries, including China. Jack Barton is in Fukushima.
After years of deliberation and controversy, Japan's Tokyo Electric Power Company, better known as TEPCO, began releasing treated water that had been used to cool damaged nuclear reactors through a 1-kilometer-long pipeline. The initial release of contaminated water from the Daiichi nuclear power plant is expected to take about 17 days and involve 7,800 tons of contaminated water diluted with seawater, which is currently being released into the Pacific Ocean. But that's just the start. Which is why protests continued further south in Tokyo.
汚染水の放出はこれから30年、40年続きます。
The release of contaminated water will continue for the next 30 to 40 years. The Fukushima nuclear disaster is not over. This time, only 1% of the water will be released. From now on, we will keep fighting for a long time to stop the long-term discharge of contaminated water.
I will never forgive Prime Minister Fumio Kishida because he's risking the health of the ocean. We may not be able to eat fish anymore. I'm against the release plan no matter what. Oh, I want to die. That is how I feel.
As the contaminated water was released, TEPCO's president attempted to reassure people in the seafood industry via a video message that they would be compensated for losses, and said he would seek to reassure China.
China is a very important trading partner for our country. We believe it's necessary to thoroughly explain the safety measures, and we would like to do our best to get the ban lifted as soon as possible.
For some, Tokyo's assessment and the all-clear given by the International Atomic Energy Agency are enough.
The IAEA and the government say it's okay, therefore it is safe.
But the local fishing industry union is angry, saying it was not given enough prior warning for the release. And many locals remain concerned about the long-term economic impact on their prefecture that was only starting to get back on its feet. Jack Barton, CGTN, Fukushima.
As you heard, China is reacting to the release by banning all seafood from Japan. Beijing, a key trading partner, of course, has condemned the move as irresponsible. They're concerned that the water will contaminate food supplies. China says it will bolster radiation monitoring to determine the possible impact. Japan's prime minister has asked Japan to lift the ban, and the plant's operator has pledged to provide scientific explanations regarding the release. And it's not just protests in Asia. There's also concerns on the U.S. West Coast as well. Edits Tianshan has more.
Since 2014, volunteers from an anti-nuclear organization called Mothers for Peace in California's coastal town of San Luis Obispo have been collecting sample water to test for radioactive chemicals like C-137. The isotope is a marker for contamination from the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan 12 years ago. The results show a gradual increase in the levels of C-137 over the years, with a peak observed in 2018. Environmentalists are concerned about the long-term impact of Japan's decision to start discharging treated radioactive water into the ocean.
So radiation doesn't go away like many other chemicals or whatever they might run across in the ocean that they would, it would go away. Radiation doesn't.
The Japanese government argues the discharged water will be diluted with large amounts of seawater and that its radioactivity would be far below the legal limit. But even local officials themselves have admitted to potentially unforeseen consequences.
We can't say what will happen in 30 years. We can't say, but roughly imagining the next 30 years, I believe that it is necessary to carefully and precisely build up the current plan in order to safely, steadily, and quickly proceed with the decommissioning of the Fukushima nuclear power plant.
What is known about the treatment of nuclear waste is that most of the radioactivity can be removed from the water, but some chemicals like tritium cannot be separated, and low levels of some radionuclides always remain. With the long-term potential impact on oceans not fully known, Activists in California and around the world are pleading with the Japanese government and the Tokyo Electric Power Company, which operated the plant, to change course.
Japanese activists are telling me that there's still room for more tanks. TEPCO and the government, they just don't want to spend any more money on creating more tanks for the water.
Activists are calling for more international pressure to stop the release, which could last for decades. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
For more on this issue, Ken Buesseler joins us. He's a senior scientist of the Marine Chemistry and Geochemistry at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Ken, thank you and welcome to the show. Let me start with this. The environmental impact concerns. Both sides I have said their piece. What are your thoughts?
Well, I am a little disappointed, and thanks for having me. I study oceans and radioactivity, and I think there were other options, or there still are, for maintaining that radioactivity on land, not using a pipe as an outfall pipe for dumping this radioactive material. And some of the assessments before making this decision, I don't think were complete enough. So I think we should have taken a little more time and explored other options.
Forgive me, I'm certainly no expert at this, but why does it have to be released and why now?
Well, every day they build up more and more water. So ultimately, you can't just build tank after tank, even though I disagree with the contention that they're running out of space, because on the site, there's areas that are being kept open for future core material from the reactors. Outside the fence, outside the boundary, there's a lot of land where you're not building schools and housing and things. So I don't see the immediate rush. I do think if they store the water, they need to concern themselves with earthquake-proof tanks. We don't want this to be released in a future accident. But I think there are those capabilities to store on land or solidify some of the waste as concrete.
So in other words, the water, regardless of being treated or not, has to go somewhere. And currently they're in tanks. And you're saying they could build more tanks, but couldn't they, for example, build floating tanks or have an oil tanker and put it there as safekeeping? Wouldn't that be safe?
I think, there are structures in Japan and elsewhere, earthquake-proof, multiple-walled tanks that can withstand this type of, they use them all over Japan, liquid natural gas, right? You have ways to store on land that would be simpler than something offshore or relying on boats and things like that.
China, as you know, has banned the products such as fish coming in from Japan. And I've heard it and seen it in the media, especially over in Asia. So this is a pretty big deal because the amount of fish and the sheer quantity that gets shipped from Japan to Asia, specifically, say, Hong Kong and mainland China. Do you think that that's the right move in banning all the products?
Well, I certainly think it's premature. I think that's more of a political decision. Scientifically, even if they start releasing today, you're not going to see impacts in fisheries immediately. And again, we've talked about tritium, the radioactive form of hydrogen. That's one of the least likely isotopes to accumulate in fish. But there are many other more dangerous forms of radioactivity in those tanks. And what we're hearing is, just trust us, we will take care of that before we put it in the ocean.
In fairness, there is an agency, the IAEA, as you know, that is working closely with the officials in Japan, and they have determined that there is minimal risk in all this. Do you agree with their assessment?
Well, what they said is they neither recommend or endorse Japan's plans. So this is up to the country, not IAEA, to approve or disapprove. So that's a clear distinction. What they're also saying, though, is they agree, they have trust. They trust that Japan will reduce levels down below international standards. My point is they've had 12 years with this water in tanks. Why didn't they clean them up before they made a release plan? So take a few more years, demonstrate to the world that they can take the 1,000 tanks they have, purify them, the other non-tritium contaminants, and then come back with a plan for
Wait.
release or storage.
And I want to make a distinction between the treated and untreated. So when we read it, it says treated. What do they mean by that when they say treated? What are they removing? What chemicals are they removing from that wastewater?
So this is different than normal nuclear power plant operations. This is cooling water that's in contact with the molten cores. So it becomes highly radioactive in many isotopes that are of health concern: cesium, strontium, cobalt, isotopes of plutonium. And those can be removed using things like the ALPS, the purification system that has been used for 12 plus years now. But if you look at the tanks, they've only analyzed about 40% of them. And what they show in the results are widely different amounts. Some have high, some have low levels. And by their own standards, 2/3 of those need additional cleanup. So they're proposing to move ahead for 30 or 40 years with the same system that hasn't had reproducible results. And I'm concerned of what's going to happen in the future.
Japan says that the releasing of this water, while there is a minimal risk, albeit it gets diluted because of the size of the ocean. And some countries, again, such as China, have protested against this. In your expert opinion, how big is the risk, you know, given the fact that the ocean is so big and there's dilution? Do you agree with that?
Well, for some of the forms of radioactivity, in particular tritium, there's already a lot of tritium coming from many sources, natural, other nuclear power plants. I'm not as concerned about the risk at all. But inside of those tanks, strontium-90, cobalt-60, carbon-14, which actually is difficult to remove, would accumulate near the outfall pipe. So when I think of risk, I think of near shore Japan, near where that water goes into the ocean, because it won't dilute those isotopes I mentioned.
Right.
They will accumulate locally on the seafloor.
So in a month from now, if we were to meet up for dinner and a waiter says, this fish is from the region of the Fukushima, are we eating the fish or not?
I think I'm eating there because they have set up a system that tests more fish than anywhere else in the world to the highest standard. So at some level, they will detect when things get wrong. But once they go wrong, it's too late.
Well, look, I mean, this is a serious issue, and obviously a big part of the world is impacted because it's a huge food source for everybody. I really appreciate you helping us better understand this complex topic. There are certainly very vocal folks on both sides. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.